Welcome to another episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. I'm Dave Polykoff from zenpost.com, which is your personal brand blueprint, providing business pros like you the tools, templates, and tactics to help you attract, convince, and convert your ideal client online. Again, check out zenpost.com to learn more about how to launch, grow, and monetize your personal brand today. On today's episode, we have Alison Ver Halen, President of AV Writing Services. Today, we're chatting with Alison about how we can use the power of content marketing and SEO to grow and monetize our personal brands. So, Alison, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. So, what I like to start every episode off with is just learning a little bit more about you and your backstory and what you do. So, I always start with the dreaded question that we always get asked by people we just meet. What do you do?
Yeah, and my answer is always different depending on who I'm talking to. I can talk to a lot of people and say, yeah, content marketing and SEO, and they go, oh, okay. And a lot of people get a blank face and they're just like, eh? So the other way I introduce myself is I say that I write the words that go onto your website to tell people who you are, what you do, and why we should all care. And I do that in a way that A, helps make Google your friend so you can show up when people are looking for you, and B, is actually engaging. So the real live people who find your content are more likely to keep reading all the way to that call to action. So I was listening to your intro and I love that you included was attract, convince, convert, because my tagline is attract, engage, convert, because good content needs to do all of those things. It needs to let people know you're there. It needs to convince them to come to the website. It needs to actually keep them engaged so they can get all the way to that call to action so that then you can convert them. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Yeah. And I love how there's always kind of two different versions of saying what we
Yeah.
do based on who we're talking to. You kind of have to read the room to know. Um, so speaking of knowing your audience, who would be then kind of an ideal client that you work with that would need your services?
I work with a lot of professional service providers, primarily attorneys and financial planners. Also love working with coaches, realtors, anyone who's in a space where there's a million of them. There's a million other people doing what they do. We're saying they do what they do. And it's like, okay, how do I, A, get in front of people and let them know that they should work with me rather than someone else? But also, how do I position myself as a thought leader in the industry? So I become that go-to person when someone has a question. And then, of course, staying top of mind, which is a whole other thing. So yeah, someone might see you, find your website, read a blog post, love it, click away, never come back, never hear of you again. So how do you, again, engage and convert that person? And conversion isn't always, buying something or signing up for that phone call. It might be sign up for my webinar or subscribe to my newsletter or follow me on social media, anything so you can keep putting content in front of them. So that's essentially what I help people do. Anyone who's looking, I help a lot of people in terms of where they are in their business. I help startups, but I also help people who have been in business for a while, probably started as a solopreneur or maybe with a buddy of theirs, and they grew through like networking and word of mouth and referrals. Excuse me. So, and now they need to take it to the next level. Now they're growing, they're scaling, they can't keep doing it with the one-to-one. So that's where I come in, is I help them get that piece of bringing leads to them so they don't have to keep going out and hunting them down.
And speaking of kind of that business growth story of where they were and where they grew to, how did you get involved in content marketing? Kind of what's your quick kind of hero's journey of getting involved in content marketing and SEO? Because it can be a kind of a complicated space with SEO with like algorithms and all that kind of stuff. So kind of walk us through how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, and I started, I think, in 2012 when it was not as complicated as it is now, or not as complicated, I think is a good way to put it. So I started before that. I actually majored in college in English and psychology, which turned out to be the perfect degree for what I'm doing. Little did I know, because I had no clue content marketing was a thing. I thought I wanted to work in publishing, but I graduated in 2009, right after the job market crashed. So that wasn't going to be a thing. So there were no jobs to be had in publishing or really anywhere else. So ended up answering phones for a few years, found myself between jobs at one point. My roommate at the time, her dad, who was an attorney, was awesome and offered to give me stuff to do around his office until I got back on my feet. And one of the things he needed was someone to write blog posts for his law firm. And he knew I had a strong writing background, so he offered me the gig. And I was like, what? I can get paid to write? Seriously? Yeah, sign me up. So I jumped at that chance and started writing for him and then for an associate of his and then for some friends of mine. And it just kept growing from there. And this was, like I said, back in 2012, 2013, when you put up a blog post and make it engaging and worth reading and have a decent call to action at the end, and you're going to get results. And now we're, 12 years later or so, and the story's a little different. So I fortunately kind of fell into SEO. I think if you had told me when I started out that I would need to learn SEO in order to continue doing what I'm doing, I would have been too intimidated to even try. Fortunately, I did not know that. And actually, what ended up happening was someone was doing some keyword research for me just for funsies, I guess, and sent me a screenshot. And I was fascinated. I was like, wait, people are looking for this word more than this word, even though they mean basically the same thing. And that was it. I was down the SEO rabbit hole and never really found my way back out. So, much to my surprise, I have found SEO to be one of the most fun parts of my job.
That's funny. Um, and so for people that you're working with, well, let's start where you do content marketing and SEO. For us listening, where are the areas in our marketing efforts should we be thinking about applying content marketing and SEO? Like where, if we were to work with you, kind of where were what would be the assets that we would be focusing on?
Well, certainly your website. I always start with the website, and a lot of people want to know if they can just put up stuff on social media. And I've had a client where I did that, and I turned in their blog posts to them as a Word document, and they put them up on LinkedIn as articles. Which, I mean, you can do that, and there is benefit to that, but at the same time, you don't own that content. Then LinkedIn owns that content, and they can do whatever they want with it. They can delete it, they can bury it. Speaking of algorithms, right? They can make sure it never sees the light of day for their own unclear reasons, right? So it's always start with your own website because that is the only content that you own online. And that should be where you want to drive people to. From, I'm not saying don't use social media. You absolutely should use social media and your newsletter and all of the things that you can to get in front of people, but then you need to drive them back to your website. That's got to be your home base. That's got to be where people can find out everything there is to find out about you as a person, as a founder, who your company is, what it is that you do, what are the product services that you offer, what sets you apart from the competition, what else can they sign up for? Do you have a book? Do you have webinars? All those other things. As well as, of course, your blog, especially when we're talking about the B2B world. On average, people consume, and I think this number has gone up. Last I heard it was like 5 to 7 pieces of content, but I think it's gone up since then. Point is, they're consuming several different pieces of content before they take that final step in the buyer journey, and a lot of them are going to go straight to your blog to find that information. So, and I cannot tell you personally how many times I've talked to someone in person at a networking event, and then, we have a one-to-one later on, and they went to my website in between us meeting and the one-to-one, so they could find out more about me, and suddenly they're asking me about stuff that's on my blog, and it's a great way to position yourself as a thought leader in your industry, and again, just lead people through that buyer journey.
Love that. And for those who do have a website, say a personal website, and they come to you and say, help me, review this, and let me know what's wrong with it. What are some of the typical mistakes you're finding people are making with their website, either copy or layout or what they're doing with it?
I'm not the one who came up with this phrase, but a common one is don't we all over your website, where you get to a website and people's like, well, we do this and we do that and we started here and we, and no one actually cares. People care about how you can make their lives better. And that's what your focus needs to be on. That's what's going to hook them. So talk about that everywhere. Talk about it, in your mission. It should be like, here's this problem that we saw and we wanted to solve it because, it's for whatever reason it is, whatever that problem is. Here are the results we can get for people. We knew there was a better way, and here's the better way. And now people who work with us experience these things. So yeah, make the customer, the ideal customer needs to be front and center. So you need to know who that is, which is super important because a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, are not super clear on who their ideal client is. So get really dialed in on who that client is, what problem it is that you're solving for them, and then what outcome they want and or what outcome you can help them achieve. Don't promise the moon and then give them a rock, right? You should be able to deliver on whatever it is you promise. But yeah, knowing what it is they're looking for and how you can help them get there is super important. So that should be all over your website. Your ideal client needs to be front and center in everything that you do.
And SEO can, to many, feel like a mythical creature, right? They don't really understand how it works. As you mentioned, you get someone showed you a keyword report, and all of a sudden it like opened a whole Pandora's
Hmm.
box of a new world for you. So if you could just kind of break down what is SEO, and for our audience who are people who are trying to launch, grow, monetize a personal brand, why they should care about it, how they can apply it to their
Hmm.
personal brand.
Yeah. So SEO stands for search engine optimization. So I like to refer to it as making Google your friend. Yes, there are other search engines, but Google does own 90+% of the online search market. So when we talk about SEO, we're talking about Google. So that's first and foremost is just understanding what Google wants. And yes, Google changes the algorithm and people complain, I think, that Google's messing with us. And I don't think that's the case. Just because Google, I think, has always been very clear that what it wants. I mean, if you're using the black hat and the tactics, and well, there's this little trick, and if I do this little trick, then Google will like me. And then Google goes, and that trick isn't very good. Let's change it. I mean, yes, technically they're changing the rules, but the goal is always the same. They're not moving the goalpost. The goal is always the same. The goal is always to help their users find high quality content that answers their questions. Now, how Google defines high quality content and how it figures out whether people are answering, whether content is answering people's questions, that's the part that changes. Again, not because Google's moving the goalpost, just because Google is getting better and better, I think, at identifying what makes high quality content, and trying to figure out how to identify whether content answers a specific question or not. So I always, especially with SEO from the content side, yes, there's the technical side. Yes, there are certain things you have to do to make Google happy. I'm not discounting that. But at the end of the day, if you, again, know who your ideal client is, you know what questions they're asking, and you know in which stages of the buyer journey they're asking those questions, then you can create content that answers those questions, is really in depth, high quality content, speaks to your brand, positions you as a thought leader in your industry. Do that consistently. That's a huge part of content marketing that a lot of people um, don't value is the consistency. And Google does value that. So consistently create high quality content that answers people's questions. And eventually Google will figure it out and match you with those people. Yes, you still have to have the technical side in order. Yes, you still need to understand your keyword research and formatting and all these things. But at the end of the day, that's Google's goal. Google is known as the place you go to find what you're looking for, to find information, to find such and such, right? So Google has a lot riding on that reputation. So if you can help Google do that, then you're going to end up on the winning side, regardless of what they do to their algorithm, as long as they're successfully identifying high quality content, which I do think Google is getting better and better at doing.
What are some things within the SEO space? Because there's a lot of, as you mentioned, tactics that maybe used to work, no longer work. What are the current tactics that maybe like the gurus are preaching that you absolutely are against and you say
Me.
you're advising not to do?
Ah. Oh, that's an interesting question, and I'm coming up blank. I think a lot of people are discounting. I've seen this in some of the chat rooms on SEO where people are discounting the value of backlinks. This is where we get a little more technical. And a backlink is when another person on their website provides a link in their content that leads to your website, which is super valuable. Google really does like that. And there may have been some circles that kind of overblow that and think that it's like, well, it's the only thing Google cares about. So Moz, for example, has this domain authority checker. Um, Domain authority being, in theory, checking to make sure it's a website that Google likes, that Google values, that this is a good website. So Moz created this domain authority checker. They did not work with Google to create this. They came up with their own parameters for domain authority, which relied really heavily on backlinks. So if you have a ton of backlinks, then it goes, oh yeah, it's a very high domain authority, and yet it's not ranking for relevant keywords because Google doesn't actually care. So that's one thing that has been kind of confusing. Everyone for a while is all about domain authority, and I'm like, that's not really a thing. Google has said it's not really a thing. Yes, backlinks matter. Yes, you need to get relevant, high quality backlinks. But it is not, it is by far not the only thing that Google looks at when determining whether your website is high quality and will answer their users' questions.
I know in content creation, content marketing, SEO, your toolkit is pretty valuable in helping you audit, create, publish, analyze. What are some of the kind of industry tools that you use to help you either create content, evaluate it, or kind of analyze it once it's published?
Google Analytics is what I use for analysis to see who's coming to my website, how they're getting there, how they're finding their way there. Also great for backlinks because I have found some people finding their way to my website through backlinks that I did not know existed. There's a backlink checker and analysis that I also use, but every once in a while, oh, while I go to Google Analytics and go, I'm getting a lot of traffic from that link. That's interesting. I did not know that was there. And it's really good for understanding where people are going on your website, which pages they're spending the most time on. It's not as great for tracking the individual buyer journey. And for that, I like to use HubSpot because it will show you this person clicked on this blog from here, right? And then they went to this blog and then this blog and then this blog. And then they finally, filled out the form or scheduled a consultation or whatever that final buyer journey is. But you can see because of that track that how much that one blog post is worth because it brought in that lead initially and it shows you what else they're doing on your website before going all the way to that final call to action to reach out and become a customer or a client. So HubSpot and Google Analytics are my two favorites for tracking and analyzing. Serpstat, I actually use one. My SEO tool is not as well known, especially in the not SEO world. But I was doing my research on SEO research tools before paying because you do have to pay for a subscription, and found that is the one that has the most accurate results, especially when it comes to keyword research. So I use that one all the time for my keyword research. I site audits all the time, domain analysis, backlink checkers, all those things. So that's Serpstat, Serpstat.com is my favorite SEO tool.
And let's talk about, you mentioned blog content, and blog content plays two different roles. One is for that kind of authority content people can stumble upon, read, that's a human reading it and getting value from it, and then associates that value with you, which is positive in the sales cycle and such. But then there's another person who's evaluating your content, which is Google, and they have their own way of kind of reading into the content and deciphering if it is valuable. What tactics are you taking when you're helping people create blog content to both satisfy the human with the content, but also satisfy the algorithm with the content?
Yeah, that's funny. And because I do run into this all the time where I'm writing something and I'll stumble across something in particular and it's like, oh, that sounds awkward, but it'll make Google happy. But it sounds awkward and the writer and me just can't handle it. Um, and yeah, you walk that line and it's fine. My default, especially lately, has been to err on the side of the human. Even if Google's not 100% happy with it, especially if you've got all your other SEO ducks in a row, I wouldn't worry about the occasional, okay, this keyword is, phrased this way instead of this way. Google will figure it out. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're creating it, to engage and convert those real live humans who are going to be reading it. And if it sounds awkward or if there's a poor grammar in there, even if it's a good keyword, it's going to turn off the people who are reading your content. So always err on the side of human, especially since, like I said, Google is getting better and better at identifying high quality content that real humans want to read. So if that's your default, and again, you keep doing that, Google again will, it's growing, it's figuring it out. It will eventually figure that out. As an example, it's gotten better at identifying synonyms. So although I do my keyword research and I try to make sure the keywords are in there, I do also break it up with other words and phrases that mean basically the same thing because, again, it's easier to read. No one wants to read the same word over and over again, but also because Google will still see all those words in there and figure out that it's all about the same thing. So yeah, always err on the side of the human. But yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of a balancing act there.
And I know you've written content for, I think, was it law and medical before, which, some may say are the more difficult industries to write content for, mainly when it comes to like a human consuming it, because it is a lot of
Yeah.
jargon and stuff. What would you say, or what's your way of, on the note of creating content that humans still want to consume
Hmm.
for like the boring or very highly technical industries? How are you approaching that content so that humans still can read it, enjoy it, and if they're not overly technical, can still understand it?
Hmm. Leave the jargon alone. Just don't use it. I do find myself using jargon in my own blog posts, SEO, PPC, all that stuff. I do always literally spell it out when I'm using it in my blog posts. So I'll say, PPC, pay per click, for example, or SEO, search engine optimization, because I never want anyone reading my content going, huh? She just lost me. I don't know what she's talking about. Yeah, and I actually find writing for, the lawyers and finance people and medical people really easy because it's all about the story. What story is relevant? What story are they experiencing? Are they in the middle of that you can help get them out of the tough part of the story and to their happily ever after? You don't need to get technical with that. And actually, the more you can avoid the technical and the jargon, the more effective your content is going to be because it's going to resonate with them. So, yeah, just don't do it. Don't use the jargon, especially for lawyers. Don't use the Latin. Translate it to English. Just use the language your ideal clients are using.
And so our audience and us individually are trying to grow our personal brands, and we want to use content marketing to do that. Are there any certain trends or areas or channels that you find are best for maybe just business, B2B type uh, personal brands, coaches, consultants, those that want to reach other professionals? Are there tactics or channels or things that we should be focused on right now?
Um, Not really. As far as a channel, I mean, LinkedIn is the obvious one for B2B. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because that's where my ideal clients tend to hang out and it is effective. So I do recommend that. But again, when it comes to knowing your ideal client, creating content that answers their questions, publishing it consistently, having that buyer journey mapped out so that you know with each step, each content you're creating, you know where they are in the buyer journey when they encounter that piece of content so that you know what makes sense as the call to action. Where do they want to go next? What makes sense? So that you can lead them there and then to the next step and the next step until finally they convert into becoming a client. So, yeah, I don't think it's really a trend. I do think one of the things I think people mistake a lot is they think there's like a difference between how people buy and how businesses buy. And to an extent, that's true. But people are still making the buying decisions for their businesses, especially when you're talking about solopreneurs and people who are just starting out, right? They're making all of the decisions. And we might not like to admit that we make decisions emotionally, but we do. We all make decisions emotionally because we want the praise from our boss, right? We want to look like the hero. We want to have that awesome business that is suddenly getting all these clients and is super successful and look at how awesome we are. Then we use logic to justify, well, this will help me get there because of blah, blah, blah. But it's that emotional, yes, I want this. This is what's going to help me get to that. that is going to help make that buying decision. So never underestimate the power of emotion in B2B marketing. I think a lot of people are like, oh, B2B buyers aren't emotional. Yeah, they are. You can use the numbers and the stats to help them justify their decision, but they're gonna use emotions to make that decision.
That's a really good point. And for those who do want to work with someone like you, what is the most important thing that they should come prepared with and understand and have ready or be prepared to talk about in order to make that relationship successful right out of the gate?
I think the first one is knowing why you want content marketing and SEO. I think a lot of people here, I need SEO, I should be doing content marketing, I need a blog. They don't really know why. They haven't really thought it through as far as like what it's going to get them in the end game. And yes, I can help them figure that out. And I do a lot of, figuring out their brand voice and their buyer journey and helping them map that out and matching content to each part of the buyer journey. But starting with why is super important, and also again undervalued, I think, because a lot of people as business owners, we know what we know how to do the thing we got into business to do, but actually running a business is a whole different ballgame, as it turns out. So when people tell us we have to do all these different things for our business, we go, okay, I have to do this, this, and this. And we just kind of take it at face value and don't really think about, well, wait, why am I doing this? So that's the first one, is know why you want SEO and why you want content marketing and how that's really going to help you get to the next phase in your business.
And you mentioned part of, I guess, that process that you can help your client with if they don't have that in place. But what's kind of a typical start to finish relationship like with you? If someone comes to you and has a certain goal, what's kind of that first meeting like? And then how are you kind of helping them over however long that relationship is?
Yeah, so once we decide to work together, and we've got all the paperwork signed and everything, that first meeting after that, I have a series of questions that I like to ask to kind of pull out the brand voice guidelines. Brand voice guidelines, but speaking of jargon, not using jargon, brand voice guidelines are the guidelines that you use to create content for your brand. Every time you create content, whether it's on your website, on social media, on a podcast, wherever you are, there should be certain words that you use continually because you want them to be connected to your brand. And then there should be words that you always avoid because you don't want them to be associated with your brand. It's a very, that's putting it very, I don't know. It's kind of the, speaking of words, I am completely drawing a blank as to what I'm trying to say here. It's a very broad way of saying brand voice guidelines, but that's the gist of what that is, what that means. So I always ask people for their brand voice guidelines when we start out, and especially if I'm talking to a solopreneur or someone who's just starting to figure out their brand, I get a lot of blank looks because they don't know what that means, and they certainly haven't tried to map that out. So I have come up with a bunch of questions to pull that information out of people so that I can create content that sounds like the brand that they want to create, the brand that they want to convey to the world, so that when people get to them and read that content, it always makes them feel a certain way. And you want to associate that feeling with your brand so that they can then, associate with you with that feeling, and then reach out, take that final call to action, become a client. So I have a list of questions that I like to pull that information out of them, and then I go and write the content. I always do keyword research with all of the content that I write. So that's built into the price and my system. Sometimes I do keyword research first and then create the content. Other times I create the content and then do keyword research. I have people who know what they want to write about. They just have no idea how to go about writing it. They sit down at the computer and see that blinking cursor and their mind goes completely blank. So I can write the content for them, and or I can come up with the topics and figure out, and again, that's always keyword research based. What questions are people asking around your industry that they are not finding answers to? So I use that as kind of my system to come up with topics, and then I can also write it. Sometimes I publish it for them. Sometimes they want to review it before they publish it. Like we said, I work with a lot of lawyers. They always want to touch the content themselves before it goes up. So that's a big one. Yeah, and then, sometimes I work with people for a month or two if we're just talking about landing pages, bios, sales pages, that kind of thing. And it's a one and done project. But most of my clients are ongoing. We do blogging every month. It's a certain number of blog posts every month, all the way until they retire. I had a client for like 6 years until he finally retired. So yeah, it goes on. I mean, it should be at least 6 months because that's about how long it takes to start seeing results from your blog. But after that, yeah, it can go indefinitely.
And if someone found all of that to be exactly what they need, what do you tell people is kind of the best first step for them to get a hold of you and get started?
Yeah, well, my website is AV, as in my initials, Alison Ver Halen. So that is avwritingservices.com. And like I said, I'm on LinkedIn, Alison Ver Halen. I think I'm the only Alison Ver Halen on LinkedIn. So I'm certainly the most active. So I'm very easy to find. And I'm on YouTube as well. I have Alison Ver Halen, content marketer, I think is my YouTube handle.
Yeah, if you're going to be pushing content marketing, you got to be on those channels as well, it sounds.
Hmm.
Awesome. Well, that is all for today's episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. A big thank you to Allison for being on today's show and walking us through how we can grow and monetize our personal brands with the power of content marketing and SEO. To learn more about how to launch, grow, and monetize your personal brand, make sure to subscribe to the Personal Brand Blueprint podcast. Follow me, Dave Polykoff, on LinkedIn, as well as Allison. And check out zenpost.com for details on how we can work together directly. Links to all three, plus of all of Allison's links as well, will be in the show notes below. Thanks, and see you on the next episode of the Personal Brand Blueprint.